Just as a little heads up before the video starts, I'm not claiming I believe absolutely everything that is said in these UFO and alien sightings, but it's just fun to talk about and share. I think you got to take all of this sort of stuff with a grain of salt, but to be honest, there are kernels of truth to be found in there, so if you open your mind to stuff like this, there's actually a lot of interesting stuff to be found. This is the first time I've ever tried to write this down, and the first time telling anyone outside the family. I'm leaving out time and location and some other details because I'm still scared of what might happen with it publicly, I guess. So, summer before 8th grade, me and two of my friends snuck out at midnight to go walk around the neighbourhood and go see these girls on the next block who were having a sleepover. We turn a corner in our neighbourhood and there's this huge black blimp-shaped thing in the sky. Like the pictures of the Hindenburg, but bigger than that. And as close, if not closer. Completely silent and the size of at least 4 to 5 football fields across. No exaggeration, even though I was young. We stare at it entranced, asking each other over and over again if we see it, which we all agree that we do, standing there, frozen in one place. It's like black polished gunmetal. No lights, no sound, no anything. It's just hovering there. And then I don't know what happened, but time clearly jumps. Next thing I remember is the craft or ship, government experiment, whatever the hell it is gone. And there's a tiny glowing white barbell thing in the sky, seemingly slowly falling to earth with wisps of smoke coming off it. Then 2 brand new black trucks with silver gearboxes on the back, like F-150s or S-10s, but nicer, came speeding down the street, going about 70 in a residential 25 miles per hour neighbourhood. Then after that, I remember walking home to one of my friends' houses and going to bed. At that point it was like 5 or 6 AM and the sun was coming up. We all made a promise to tell my dad in the morning, because he worked for the city but we never did. I don't know what happened later in life to one of my friends who was there, but the other was my best friend and we sort of made an unspoken pact never to talk about it again. Don't know how or why we did that though. We all grew up and I sort of lost touch with him too. We did reconnect over Facebook and such over the years, but it was like there was something between us neither of us wanted to touch or talk about. Looking back on it now, there's no way we could have been the only ones to see it. It wasn't that late at night and it was over a heavily populated suburb of a major city. The idea of this has always scared me more than any sort of possible abduction scenario. That there were others and we're all voluntarily suffering a sort of collective amnesia, accepting how we're not. I thought about hypnosis, but that scares me too. Plus, I'm not sure if I'd trust the results. I was just a kid then, and I'm not sure if I could trust the hypnotist. What I do know, again, is that there's no way it was just the 3 of us who saw it. We're talking a huge thing hovering in the sky directly above hundreds of houses, just after midnight on a summer weekend night. But nothing on the news, nothing in the paper, nothing on TV, and no words spoken about it again, ever, by anyone. This is a true story though. I'm a little older than the average around here, I think, but I know what creepypasta and stuff like that is. This happened. And there's no way I'm the only one who remembers. No way. Thanks for letting me get that off my chest. I can't say for sure what happened to me that night, but here is what I know for sure. I was driving home for the weekend from school at Indiana University. It takes me about 2 hours to get home, and I left Bloomington around 10 PM. At exactly 10:53 I am on a rural stretch of the 2-lane highway I take home, and I noticed what appeared to be flashing lights behind me. I thought, Great, I'm getting pulled over. So I turned onto the next country road about a quarter mile from where I noticed the lights. As the car came to a stop and I started to open my glove box to get out my registration and proof of insurance, the lights suddenly disappeared, and no car drove past. Now, here is where the story takes a turn for the weird, and I'm sure you guys will think I'm just making it all up, because it really does seem like something straight out of a typical UFO movie or story. The electronics in my car started to go haywire. The radio was randomly changing stations while the volume kept going up and down, while the dome light and headlights started to flicker and turn off and back on. This was at 10:56 PM. I start thinking to myself that my battery must be failing, or else I have a short somewhere in the electric system of my car. So I lean down to pop the hood so I can take a better look at the battery, and that is the last thing I remember doing. The next thing I know, I open my eyes and see nothing but the night sky full of bright stars. It was a cold night and it seemed like I had never seen stars that bright in my life. I sat up and looked around and I saw absolutely nothing. Nothing at all. I was in the middle of a field surrounded by corn stalks left over from the recent harvest. As I started to come to my senses, I began to freak out. Where am I? Why the fuck am I asleep in the middle of a field? And where the fuck is my car? I got up and started walking toward the distant headlights I could see from a road about half a mile away. When I got to the nearest intersection, I looked at the signs which read 350N and 50W. I was half a mile away from my car, which was just right off the main road. I started walking toward the headlights I could see on the main road. I can't say how long it took me to walk the half mile, but it couldn't have been more than 10 or 15 minutes. When I arrived at my car, all the lights were out. My battery had died, which struck me as odd because I couldn't have been gone for that long. I looked at my phone, which was sitting on the passenger seat, and the time was 2:17 AM. Over 3 hours had passed since I turned off onto the side road for the flashing lights behind me. I remember sitting in my car completely dumbfounded, wondering what the hell had just happened to me. After about half an hour of just sitting there, I remembered that my battery was dead, so I got on the phone and called AAA to come out and give me a jump. It took about an hour for them to get out to me since I was a good distance away from the nearest town, during which time I just sat in silence, running through the possible scenarios in my head concerning what had just happened. To this day, I couldn't tell you what really happened to me that night. All I know is I can't think of any plausible explanation as to why I woke up over half a mile away from my car in the middle of a cornfield, which was more than 3 hours after I had stopped. I've only ever shared this story with one other person, my uncle. I'm sure people would either look at me like I'm crazy, or they would call bullshit on the whole story. And I can't blame them. If somebody came to me with a story like that so closely mirrors the stereotypical encounter story, I probably wouldn't believe them either. I was travelling back home with my mum from my aunt's house on a warm, sunny afternoon. While I was sitting in the passenger seat, an object just appeared in the sky a little to our left. We both saw it immediately. The size of it is what was shocking more than anything. It had the classic saucer shape and was shining brightly because the sun was reflecting off of it. We continued driving down the road a few seconds, just admiring this craft, when all of a sudden we saw something I still don't believe to this day. It just vanishes, disintegrates, disappears, whatever you want to call it. I looked back at my mum and I could tell by her expressions she had seen the same thing. Ever since this sighting, I have always been interested in UFOs and the possibility of other life in our universe. This object in the sky was definitely not a helicopter, aeroplane, or a flock of geese. My mum and I still talk about the sighting we had and can't come up with a reasonable explanation as to what we saw that day. This is my UFO story, and it's not a hoax or fabrication. Everyone always laughs at me when I tell this story, but that's fine. I know what I saw. My mum tells of a story of her and a friend. Let's call her friend Lisa. When my mum and Lisa were teenagers, they were up on the roof of Lisa's house and they see a bright light in the sky. Next thing they know, the light is gone. Thing is, they think they've been on the roof for like 15 minutes, but something like 3 hours had passed. Mum doesn't remember anything about what happened during that time, and Lisa simply refuses to talk about it. She would answer my mum with things like, "I don't know," and "just drop it," for a very long time. So a couple months later, Mum moves away and loses contact with Lisa for about 10 years. She finally meets up with her again and immediately notices that something is odd about Lisa. She appears very distant to her, with a very dreamy demeanour, like she was really happy and at peace for no good reason. After they talk for a bit, Lisa brings up the incident on the roof. Mum says she still doesn't really remember anything about it, but Lisa remembers. She remembers everything. She said that at first it was all in bits and pieces and she couldn't remember any of it clearly. She was confused and scared and wanted to avoid discussing it. Then, as time passed, she began to remember more and more. She remembers it all clearly, and she remembers the other 3 times she was abducted after that clearly as well. At first, they paralysed her somehow and did all sorts of invasive experiments on her, but by the most recent time, they stopped probing her and began to talk with her. They didn't speak English or any other human language, but she could understand everything they said, even though she can't speak their language herself. Apparently they told her all sorts of things. Stuff about space, Earth itself, and most shockingly, predicted years beforehand that she would get pregnant in a specific year, and it would also be a stillborn, and that she would never be able to have children again. They told her that it was not their fault, and they even made an attempt to save her from this fate, but they were unsuccessful. They also told her that they had abducted my mother. Another time after that first incident. Mum says she has no recollection of any other potential abductions, but she does have recurring nightmares of being abducted, but she's almost sure that they're just that, nightmares. Anyway, Lisa tells Mum that every time she speaks with them, she comes to understand the truth more and more. When Mum inquires what the truth is, Lisa just says that you will know eventually. And she says that once she learned of the truth, that everything became wonderful. Mum has seen her a few more times over the years. We still live in another state from her. And she apparently has a pretty normal life and doesn't obsess over alien stuff like some supposed alien abductees do. She only ever brings it up in passing, not like it's a central part of her daily life. TLDR, aliens abduct my mum and her friend. Mum doesn't remember much, but her friend remembers everything. Apparently they were both abducted again several times after that. Aliens predict the future. Not a very spectacular story here, but it's true. I've always felt some encounter stories were real, but what made me truly believe was one night standing outside watching the stars. It was late, maybe 2 AM, and out in the country so it was dark, no streetlights and very little to no moon. I was watching what I thought was a satellite moving across the sky from right to left. I didn't think twice about it, as I saw them all the time. Suddenly though, the satellite stopped and shot off fast, totally disappeared, at a 45-degree angle from the direction it came from. I've never ever seen a satellite change direction, ever. It startled me so much I stood there for a bit wondering if I really saw it or not. But I did, 100% certain. I was on a wildfire just south of Dugway Proving Grounds in Utah. We were in fire rigs driving to the incident area. 4 trucks in close convoy when we heard helicopters. 8 black military choppers escorted us in formation for like 10 miles. We assumed they were just doing drills and using us for fake target practice or something. A little while later though, we were parked and about to start hiking to the fire line, when suddenly a thin column of smoke shoots probably about 200 feet into the sky. It was a good mile away, but the concussion was pretty significant when it hit us, and the noise was still ridiculously loud. We thought it was probably no big deal. We knew we were near a strike zone. A good 5 minutes later and an aircraft like nothing I've ever seen flew by us at maybe 500 feet. It was flat, black and sort of rectangular, but with fins and wells on the underside. It was moving pretty slow and was dead silent, so I have to assume it was some sort of stealth glider. It sounds ridiculous, but it immediately reminded me of a huge flying Batmobile, Tim Burton era. After that, some military personnel got on our radio frequency and instructed us to leave the area immediately. When our crew asked who it was and why they signed off, the incident commander, the guy in charge of managing the entire situation, came on the radios and said we were evacuating the area. They sent us to a completely different fire about 100 miles to the south, and never told us why except that it was a higher priority, which was bullshit. It was already out when we got there, and we just assisted the crews in the mop-up operation. The thing that confuses me about this is that if the army didn't want us to see that shit, or if it was dangerous, why didn't they keep us clear of the area in the first place? Either a communications breakdown, or they had a now shit situation going down, and had to get us out of there without warning. Edit. This is the closest thing anybody has suggested for what it could be. Kicked back on a rooftop one clear summer night in Germany, looking up at the stars. I spot a satellite up there and watch it traverse the night sky as they usually do. It just looked like a regular little old white dot in the sky. No different from a star except it moved in a constant direction at a constant speed, as satellites tend to look like from the naked eye from the ground. Suddenly, when it was pretty much directly overhead, this thing turns on a dime and moves in a completely different direction, then again and again, tracing a perfect isosceles triangle pattern. When it moved back to the point it had initially changed heading from, it up and fucking hauls ass at a much higher speed and a slightly different heading than when I first spotted it, until it dips below the horizon. At first I thought it was a surveillance satellite or a weather satellite or whatnot. Told a friend of mine who'd been in army intelligence and knows about stuff like this. He told me satellites can't manoeuvre like that at all. Claimed I'd seen a bona fide UFO. Edit 1. This was about 1995 or 96. Edit 2. I like your meteorite theory, but why would a meteorite move in a perfect isosceles triangle-like pattern? Okay, here it goes. The first time I had ever seen anything I was 7 in Houston, Texas. I used to like to climb on top of my mum's Suburban in the driveway and stare at the stars. One night I saw an intensely bright floating light over the tree line, probably about a half mile away. I hollered towards it, but nobody came to see it. I did not see anything else until March of 2008. This experience happened between the 10th and the 15th, but I can't give a specific date because I was up for 4 days trying to come up with some explanation to satisfy what I had seen. This was in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. My mother lived in a garden home community, all houses the same size, all one story, and you had a great visibility distance-wise. I walked out of my buddy's place at exactly 4 AM to a bright starry night. When I walked out, something caught my eye to the left of me. I looked over and saw a bright blue, yellow, green, white, red, orange, strobing, flashing light floating silently to the left. I stood in awe at it and did not want to go grab anyone, because I didn't want to miss anything. I watched as it passed in front of the moon behind my friend's place, and I saw the outline of the craft. It was a teardrop, sunflower seed type shape, and the craft seemed to have the lights being transmitted from the top half of it. It was almost as if it was transmitting some type of light pattern upward. It also had a dark, thin, smooth line of exhaust that disappeared 50 to 75 feet behind it. This all occurred no less than 400 yards away from me. After it passed the moon, I ran inside and grabbed someone. He saw it, but it was too far away to make out where it was. I went home, which was only a few blocks away, and looked out from the driveway the same direction the first craft had come from. I saw 2 dim white lights slowly coming over the horizon at a slow pace heading towards me. I then ran inside and grabbed my mother out of bed. We stood there for about 20 minutes while 5 separate crafts flew over us. First came 2, then 1. About 6 or 7 minutes apart from each other, going maybe 20 miles per hour, maybe 200 feet up and completely silent. The way that they looked from underneath was each one had 2 huge bright white lights which were maybe 30 to 40 feet across, but they were so bright it was hard to get a good estimate. They also had a pulsating red one between the white lights that dimmed and relit. I would estimate from the size of the white lights that each craft was maybe between 150 to 200 feet wide. The last craft that flew over us flew over lower and slower than the first 4 had. Then it made a noise. It let out a sound that to this day still haunts me. What I could best compare it to would be this sound. Then followed immediately after by another sound. Take these sounds, except make it digital and multiply it by 50. This was loud. And the craft did that twice. These crafts flew directly over us and I believe that the sound was an acknowledgement. Whatever was piloting it knew we were watching it. Kind of like a hello. I immediately started crying. I had no idea what I was looking at or just heard. The second big experience I had occurred a couple of weeks later. I was standing in my driveway smoking a cigarette listening to my iPod somewhere around 2 AM. I decided to pause my iPod to turn on the backlight. I waved my hand over it a couple times, making somewhat of a strobe pattern. I didn't hear anything. I didn't see anything come up, but I got that feeling of being watched. I looked up, and directly above me was a trapezoid-shaped craft with rounded edges that had a dark red and black pulsating glowing outline. It was like flowing electricity. It wasn't even 75 feet up. I could have hit this thing with a rock. I stood there while it hovered directly above me, completely silent for maybe 10 to 15 seconds while it made this kind of motion similar to the ball that Luke trained with in Star Wars. It hovered side to side, front to back in a smooth motion, never getting more than 20 feet away from its original position. It was extremely fascinating, but I was frozen stiff. After those few seconds, I waved one hand at it in a friendly manner, and it then changed light pattern and hovered away behind my house. Upon deeper inspection, the fact that it knew that I saw it but made no effort to evade my detection makes me think it wanted me to follow it, although I was too freaked out to think about that at the time. I've seen that same craft on 3 other different occasions. Once again in Tuscaloosa, once in Hoover, and once in Bessemer. The time I saw it in Hoover was at an apartment complex at the top of a huge hill with a great overlook. It was night time when I was with friends. Over the overlook I saw a grey craft facing my direction that looked similar to a Hoff fighter. Forgive the Star Wars references. And as soon as I saw it, it took off to the right, silently, extremely quick. The times in Bessemer and Tuscaloosa, the trapezoid shape appeared in the sky solid white, stretched to twice its length, and then the bottom shot up to the front, like it hit light speed or something. I do frequently see what I like to call streaks. They look like shooting stars, only very low, move slower, but they still have tails that stream behind them. They can also appear in many different colours. One strange story is one night when I had a dream in Tuscaloosa. In the dream I couldn't see or hear anything, but I could feel things. I was laying on something cold, and I felt what seemed like rubber between my legs or on my junk. It was very strange to me, since a lot of people who report abductions report sperm and eggs being taken for breeding programs. The next morning I went to let the dog out in the backyard, which is very small. To the left of the patio there was a solid white ring in the grass that was maybe 8 to 10 feet wide. I showed my mother and she had told me that she had heard a noise that woke her up the night before, but she had just dismissed it. Another extremely confusing experience I had occurred in my driveway in Tuscaloosa. To give you an idea of where this occurred, look up Shelton State Community College. The house was less than a quarter mile from the campus in the Englewood neighbourhood. It was night time and I heard this static that I could compare to a jet. I looked over and directly above the community college was a light blue slit in the sky. I would say it was maybe 200 yards long, completely vertical, and had what looked like white electric currents coming off of both sides of it. I looked at it and maybe about 25 white things shot out of the slit to the left, one at a time, at a quick pace leaving the trail behind it that I previously talked about. After they passed, the bottom of the slit went upward until the slit closed, and it made a strange sound, and then it was gone. I've also had a bunch of experiences with orbs, some solid light that float across the sky or move in strange patterns, and some that brighten up to a great intensity and then fade as they pass. After that first big experience, I started doing some research because I was so confused. I understand that I've had an abnormally large amount of experiences, and I honestly can't tell you why. I wish I could. I found a type of UFO witness called a contactee. These people are similar to abductees, except they are kept up with. I have no idea why I've had so many experiences, and I have only listed a fraction of them here. My best guess would be that since I acknowledged the presence of whatever it was I was seeing, it decided to keep up with me. It's kind of a gift and a curse. There are so few people that I can talk with about it and be taken seriously. I want to seek hypnotherapy to see if there might be anything else I could uncover. I'm grateful, but I still don't know much about my experiences. If y'all can get anything out of what I shared, then great. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them. So here we go. This is a reply to another one of the questions. Really interesting story, says Wandering Cadaver. Thank you. I would be happy to read any more you might have. And here's his response. I don't even know where to start. Maybe the most enlightening experience I had was this. I used to talk about these things that were happening to anyone who was willing to listen. I've become a little more reserved from being hurt a few times opening up. It seemed to me like the more I would try to inform people about what happened, the more experiences there would be. There was this guy named Adam that I was hanging out with for a while. I took him home from a friend's apartment one night at around 3 to 4 am, which was normal for that time period since I was sleeping until 4 in the afternoon. I'd been trying to talk to people about this stuff non-stop, and when I took him to his house, we chilled and smoked in the driveway for a minute. All of a sudden, an intensely bright light appeared over the hill that was less than a mile from his house, and we were both immediately drawn to it. I started looking around, seeing if there was anything else happening, and I looked up. Above us were 2 orbs pivoting around, and I drew his attention to them. I told him that I felt like they showed us that bright light to try and gauge our responses, and we just looked up and waved at the orbs. Then, all of a sudden, the sky came to life. There must have been 3 dozen orbs flying around in every which direction, and over the horizon, streaks started taking off. It was definitely a spiritual experience. I have a couple more experiences with orbs. I was on a friend's back porch who lived near me, and he and I were both very interested in the topic. We were sitting there chatting, and this bright light, maybe a couple 100 yards away, starts drifting across the sky very slowly, very low and silent. As it drifted, it brightened in intensity to the point where we couldn't look directly at it. It was an orange light colour. It stayed lit a couple of seconds and then slowly faded out, and we just looked at each other in awe. That happened there a couple more times, once upon request. Naturally, people made fun of me for claiming that these things happened to me. We were trying to explain to a couple of friends what happened when we saw the orb and they didn't believe us, so I said, "You want to see a UFO? Come over here." No idea why, I was just feeling cocky. We get to the back porch where the first experience happened, and sure enough, that light brightened up again and did the same thing. I've only had people with me for a few experiences. I've developed my own thoughts about what has happened to me, its origins, and why me. After my first big experience happened with the 5 crafts, I jumped online and started doing research. I feel almost as if I was led to this. I found this thing called the Raelian belief, or intelligent design. It basically states that ETs seeded human life on Earth through genetic manipulation, and we will eventually become so advanced that we'll seed life on other planets ourselves. It's very closely aligned with the ancient astronaut theory in stating that ETs have played a role in the development of human civilization in multiple ways. The way the Raelian belief started is from this dude, Rael, who claims he saw a UFO land in a dormant volcano in the 70s. He says he approached the craft, and out came a small humanoid-like ET that educated him about how all of our religions were wrong, and stemmed from ancient ET misinterpretation. When I looked at it closer, when you think of instances like Ezekiel being lifted into the heavens, chariots of fire in the sky, or the light that guided Moses through the desert, it's not difficult to attribute it to ETs. The interesting thing was that the ET told him that every major prophet of every religion was manipulated by ETs via thought implantation to instill spiritual beliefs that compelled them to share their beliefs in spirituality with others. Not saying that I believe any of this, but the more that I spread the word about my experiences, the more they seem to happen. I guess I would consider myself an abductee. As a child, I had experiences of being abducted. I would lie awake in my bed all night in a state of hypervigilance, trying to observe the bedroom door, closet door, windows, and walls all around me at once, until I exhausted myself to sleep. I have various memories of the little grey aliens grabbing me by the wrist to lead me around places outside of my bedroom. Wherever they took me, it was nothing resembling a ship or anything, just a plain room. They'd count my spine, running their fingers up each vertebrae on my back, and to my child's mind they were counting them. They'd also enter my room through the walls and so on. I'm terribly afraid of needles, and I'm always worried that the nurse is going to touch the bone of my arm with the needle. The small grey ones are about as tall as toddlers, 3 foot I suppose, classic grey, large heads, big insect eyes. Their torso and limbs are very slender, and you have difficulty figuring out how they stand and walk upright carrying that large head. Their fingers are very long, and the long fingers and the eyes are the creepiest things about them. Being with them is like being in the same room as a very creepy doll or mannequin, except they move around and are alive. They have a very disturbing vibe about them. Their skin is grey and seems not to be flesh. It looks like it's made out of construction putty or something like that. They have no wrinkles and no musculature. Their skin doesn't wrinkle when they move, and you can't see muscles flexing or anything like that. They don't seem to have any personality or will. They're just like drones or something. I imagine that they probably stand in a closet when they're not working, but they still seem to be organic. They're not machines or robots. That skin and those eyes are their real skin and eyes, not a spacesuit or a helmet. I also have memories of a big grey alien, perhaps 6 feet tall, who I'd be brought to after the little guys were done with me. She definitely had a personality and a sense of presence about her. Her skin seemed to have more features. She wasn't just putty like the little guys. Don't know how I thought she was female, but perhaps her features were more slender. She would look into my eyes with her large eyes, and she could see all of my thoughts. I could sense her in my head. She would say things to me, clearly as an attempt to get me to believe them or buy into them. I could recognise them as not being my thoughts, but she didn't seem to care. Trying to push against her will is like pushing a car in neutral when it's coming down an incline. The car pushes you instead. Having her in my mind is a very disempowering experience, and I would almost liken it to rape, but I don't know what rape really is like, and I imagine it's way worse. But I'm trying to give you an idea of what it's like. It's not cool or fun at all. Someone else is in your innermost sanctum, your own mind and thoughts, and you didn't invite them. You don't want them there, and they're just doing whatever the hell they want. At various times she told me telepathically, "Don't make too much trash, or people will get sick, and stop cutting down so many trees." She also told me, "We're very grateful for your help. You're a big help to us in our project, and don't tell other people about us because they can't see us and they will only get upset." She tried to make me feel positive about being there, but I wasn't having any of it. I only wanted them to take me back home. I had no idea where I was. It's like when you're a kid and a teacher tries to encourage you for doing something you don't want to do, like sweeping the floor or picking up after yourself. "You did a great job sweeping, you're such a big help." You don't give a shit about helping the teacher, you just want to go and play or whatever. Well, I didn't care what the big alien was saying, I just wanted to go home. They never told me any secrets of the universe, and I've never had any hybrid alien or non-grey experience. I've had sleep paralysis experiences, and to me, these are different. Just like a dream is different from a nightmare, and a nightmare is different from sleep paralysis. In sleep paralysis, I have a dream or nightmare about a physical presence that is hostile or angry, and is restraining me or physically accosting me. I panic for a few moments, find that I can't move, and then I jerk myself awake. Once I'm awake, it fades away quickly. Just like a nightmare becomes not so real when you wake up. With alien abductions, I don't find myself knowing that they've happened. I just wake up feeling like complete shit, maybe several days in a row, and I might have daydreams about aliens or remembering scenes from alien abduction shows. Sometimes, I wake up in the early morning with the sense that they just left. I won't be able to sleep for hours, and I'll be very aware and afraid of doors and windows. I'm a grown man, and when this happens, I'm not able to fall back to sleep for at least an hour. As a kid, I remember finding an alien abduction book in the library. It was like a door had been unlocked. My mum took us to McDonald's afterwards, and I finished the book there. I couldn't put it down, and for the next 3 days I was in shock. It was like confirmation that they were real, that other people did know about them, and that I was really never safe from them. After that, as a teenager, I got my hands on all the alien abduction books and shows I could find. They scared the shit out of me, but I had to keep reading them. I have strong opinions regarding the depictions of grey aliens, and there are some I consider to be very accurate, while others seem like a stylized interpretation by someone who has never seen them. Basically, the more realistic or human they look, with facial features such as cheeks, septum, nose, wrinkles, under the skin musculature, the less authentic it seems to me. Also, the eyes may be completely insectoid, wrapping around the sides, not forward-facing or oval like a human's. I suppose a wasp or a mantis has the most alien-like eyes out of all the insects. There are certain cats I've seen that seem to have alien-shaped eyes as well. In my 20s, I started seeing a therapist. I have depression, and during some really intense sessions, I recalled the memories of the aliens, the specific memories I outlined about. I don't believe the memories were blocked or anything, I just never dared ever to recall them, because the whole thing is so terrifying. I believe it's a form of PTSD. It really does interfere with your sleep and mood. After that session, I was shaking so badly the therapist wasn't going to release me to let me drive. She had to walk me through breathing exercises to get me to calm down. If I was someone other than myself, I would be completely skeptical and conclude that the alien abduction experience is just another type of sleep paralysis, or that reading too many scary alien books will corrupt your mind, or that it's a cover memory for sexual abuse. But why would you dream up aliens? They're as small as toddlers and frail looking. They never touched me sexually anyways. But me having had the experiences I had, I just can't believe it. Even if they devise an experiment where they hook people up to machines and have brainwaves proving that certain types of sleep paralysis are the alien abduction phenomenon, I would still believe they were somehow real, because the experiences feel real, even after you wake up, not like a dream, nightmare, or sleep paralysis. I don't believe that aliens are organic creatures that evolved on another planet and fly here in advanced ships. The physics of faster than light travel just doesn't work. The only explanation I can come up with is that either they are creatures that can travel interdimensionally, perhaps they come from another dimension themselves, or they exist as independent entities in human consciousness. I know both of those are too crazy to really be explanations, but to me, those creatures are more than nightmares. I know that on a logical level, this is some kind of nightmare or brain disturbance, but let me tell you, the people that suffer from this really do suffer. Some people made up a name for this: post-abduction disorder. They aren't trying to say that abductions are real, but just trying to help people who suffer from this. Of course, it's not taken very seriously, and I understand why. But I do wish sufferers could talk more freely about it, without fear of ridicule or dismissal. I know this may sound completely crazy to people who haven't suffered through it. This is the most I've ever told anyone about it, really. I'm not interested in going to any groups or anything. My suspicion is that they are convinced there's a government cover-up. I'm not interested in conspiracy theories. In response to one of the commenters, Kill Poverty, asking, "Suppose these experiences were real, why do you think they're doing this?" the OP throwaway abductee replies with, "I guess I have to say honestly, I have no idea, and I don't think anybody can guess. I feel they are more advanced than we are, and us trying to figure it out would be like a wolf trying to understand why it had been darted and tagged. The wolf would probably think it had something to do with hunting or sense, because their lives revolve around hunting and sniffing things. If a wolf thought that, you might argue in the most basic sense it was right. Tracking is kind of hunting it, but it's not specific or sophisticated enough to be right. I'm not going to hunt it down to eat one day. To me, the closest thing I can relate to is the same reason we tag and track wild animals like apes or whales. They seem to be interested in us biologically. My best guess is that they are just field biologists, observing a sentient being as something like themselves. But I really don't know. I don't feel like they ever leveled with me or explained anything to me. As far as my experiences are concerned, they don't seem to be interested in meeting us at our level. They're just manipulating us for whatever interest they have. I guess this answer is informed by my personal experiences and all of the abduction media I've consumed. I really don't know why they would do this, but when I watch a nature documentary where a helicopter darts a wolf and they tag the animal, I think, I totally know what that is like. So that's just my human interpretation of whatever the hell they are doing. (2010) Los Angeles, California. I was cleaning up around my apartment when I noticed my kitchen lamp swinging and my building rocking. Obviously, earthquake. It lasted for a bit and I called my friend to make sure she was okay. As we were chatting, I was standing out on my balcony which overlooks Runyon Canyon, a popular hiking trail. I suddenly noticed this object hovering high in between the mountains. It was way too high to be a helicopter and too small and low to be a plane. What made it super strange was its shape and lack of movement. It was orb-esque and stood stagnant for about a solid 3 minutes before moving at a snail's pace to the west. I'm talking slower than any aircraft, blimp, kite, whatever that I've ever seen. It also seemed to reflect off the sun, but only at some angles. I grabbed my crappy digital camera and tried to capture it as best as I could. After moving towards the left, and then once again staying completely still, it immediately darted at what seemed like an impossible speed in the opposite direction, upwards, and disappeared. Plain old man-made, government or other, it was one of the weirdest, best sightings I've ever experienced, especially since it was in broad daylight. When I looked through the pictures, I thought I got nothing, but after zooming in, I noticed the object showed up in 3. I don't have Photoshop or anything, so it's not the clearest quality, but hey, still neat. Back in spring of 1997, a group of us neighbourhood kids were looking up at the night sky, observing the Hale-Bopp comet. I grew up hours from any major city, so the view was pretty clear. After a while, we started to notice a red and white dot circling around each other, making sudden movements in every direction. It was like no aircraft I've ever seen, or have ever seen since. At a certain point, they merged into one craft and then shot out into 3 smaller crafts. Although, we couldn't tell exactly whether it was an aircraft or not, because it just appeared to be balls of light. This went on for a couple of hours. Right before the lights disappeared, they accelerated at lightning fast speed into the darkness. We all went home terrified of what we saw. The next day, on the front page of our small hometown paper, it said it had received several calls. The explanation they gave was that the local airport was testing aircraft. I'm not sure how much I believe that story because of what I saw. To this day, whenever I see my friends that were there that night, we'll sometimes talk about it. None of us can be sure what we saw, but to this day, none of us have ever seen anything like it. Well done for making it to the end of the video. Your reward for doing so is actually some new reports I've found. These are eyewitness accounts over the River Trent, West Bridgeford, Beeston, Grantham, in the Nottingham area. This is actually from bbc.co.uk/Nottingham/spotlight from 2002. So the first one is from Mavis in Arnold. I've seen a couple of UFOs. I saw one in Ingold Mells in the late 1960s. We went to a little caravan site when my children were small. We just left the social club to go back to the caravan. I looked up, and there in the sky was this flying saucer thing. It moved as though it was watching us. I felt as though we were being watched. It wasn't very big. It wasn't very high either. I could just see the underneath of it. I even drew the thing. I've still got the drawing all these years later. It had a band round the middle of it that moved very slowly. As we ran along the caravan to watch it, it moved very slowly along with us, then it just vanished. I've no idea where it went. There wasn't a hole in the ground or anything. Second sighting. The second one was in Arnold. Lots of people saw it, and there was about 50 sightings of that one. I wrote it all down at the time. We'd been babysitting. It was late at night, about 11 o'clock. We looked up, and it was like 2 big car headlights in the sky, moving very slowly. It took about 10 minutes to get down the avenue, and it's only a small one. I think it was just passing by and observing. Later it passed over Basford, Hucknall, and ended up in Ilkeston. I can only say, it's got to be from outer space. Mike from Hucknall. It was about 11 years ago. We were coming back from the city by the forest. It was quite dark and there was this bright light in the sky. It was strange the way it caught our attention. Then it moved very suddenly to the side, too fast to be anything that's natural or airborne. It moved several miles in a split second. Then it was stationary for a while. We stopped and had a look. It went off at a 30-degree angle and sped off. It must have travelled 20 miles in the sky in that time. And then it just disappeared. I've been used to flying for 30 odd years. There's nothing on Earth that could travel that fast in that space of time. It went in different directions. There's no question what it was. I'm a firm believer in UFOs. When you consider the size of the universe, why should we be the only asteroid blessed with life? There's got to be something out there. Ruth in Stapleford. It was about 1978 or 1979 in Stapleford. It was around 7:30 PM and I went out to get the washing in. I thought, the moon's bright tonight, as I was lifting the clothes off the line. And when I looked up, there it was. It had lights all over it. I went in to fetch my 9-year-old twins and came out again. It was still there, hovering. All three of us were looking up at it. Then it shot off, and I've never seen anything move so fast in all my life. We ran through the house. It was going off over the school nearby. We never mentioned this to anyone else, because we thought they'd think there was something wrong with us. We do still talk about it though whenever we get together. And Peter, my son, says there was a low humming sound, but I didn't hear that. In the Evening Post the night after, there was a report of a courting couple in a field who saw it land in a field in Arnold, and it made headlines in the Evening Post. I've never forgotten it. I.B. Edgson, Mansfield Woodhouse. I wish to record an incident that happened to me at Skegby, Nottingham, some 25 years ago. It was so scary that I still remember it vividly. We'd gone to babysit for our daughter and son-in-law whilst they had an evening out. After putting my 2 granddaughters to bed around 9 PM, I left my husband in charge while I took their dog for a walk. They lived in Wheatfield Way at Skegby, and I walked the dog onto Buttery Lane when I was stopped in my tracks by a sudden uneasy feeling. I became aware of an object hovering above me, similar in shape to the old Hoover Constellation vacuum cleaner. There was a very low humming sound, and small red and yellow lights flashing around the top. It was a very clear night, but unfortunately there was no one else around. I felt very uneasy, as if I was being watched, and the dog, a usually boisterous beagle, sat quietly at my feet. I watched nervously for several minutes. Then the object slowly moved away in the direction of Kingsmill Hospital towards Mansfield. It was an experience I will never forget, and remains vividly in my mind. The area is very open, very light traffic, and at night, very quiet. D.B. Maycroft, Beeston. The incident occurred in 1950. I was working with a Nottingham firm doing contract work for the BBC. While working a 600 foot up with a TV mast on a very clear day, I observed a UFO in the direction of Huddersfield. The UFO was saucer-shaped and silver in colour. The object was observed for approximately 2 hours by at least 20 people, most of them being staff of the BBC station, including the station manager. After about 2 hours, it accelerated upwards at very fast rates and vanished. I was told that the incident was reported to the authorities. The second incident is seeing a very large silver and orange disc. This was in 1954. I was walking down an unlit country lane. The disc was stationary and low in the sky towards Hardwick Hall. I only saw it for about 5 minutes, and then it just vanished. On this occasion, I was on my own. The third time I saw something unusual was in 1989. I was walking home from an afternoon at work. It was about 11 PM in December, and it was a cold, frosty, clear night. I was drawn to look upwards to a noise like a loud buzzing bee, looking towards Long Eaton. I saw a triangular-shaped object. It was about 60 foot long on each side, and along the underside of each edge there was alternating red and blue lights. The whole thing was slowly rotating in a clockwise direction. After approximately 10 minutes, the lights started to go out, and the object vanished. My last sighting was in 1997, at about 11:30 AM in February. I saw a pulsating orange ball over the River Trent. The ball appeared to be stationary. After less than a minute, it moved away at a tremendous rate and vanished. Pat in Southwell. It's 34 years ago now. I was pregnant with my son and lived in Grantham, and every Friday evening, my husband used to go out with a friend, and I used to go to his wife's house. It happened every Friday evening for about 6 weeks. We saw an awful lot of activity over our house in Grantham. It was summer, and it was very warm. We did actually report it, because we'd seen aeroplanes going up and chasing after these things and obviously losing them. What did they look like? There was a real assortment. It was almost like a display, and as I say, an occurrence every week. But we actually saw what you call a mothership opening up and little ships coming out. It was unbelievable, and they were coming low over us. At first we were petrified, but when it kept happening week after week, we weren't anymore. We were almost willing them to come. Why did they come on Fridays? I have no idea. Maybe they did come other evenings, but it just happened to be when we were outside. When you were staying at your friend's house, were you on the bottle a bit? No, I honestly wasn't. I mean, I was 7 months pregnant at the time. One evening my friend actually rang one of the local Air Force bases. We were trying to see what they knew because they were obviously chasing these things. And they denied all knowledge, of course. Then a short while afterwards, she had a visit by 2 gentlemen. One very, very strange man who didn't speak at all, and the other one that spoke very aggressively. They told her that she hadn't seen anything, and was never to repeat that she had seen anything to anyone else. Who were these people? We don't know. Well, honestly, Men in Black springs to mind. That was the way it was, and it was very, very strange. Did you take any photos? No, but my friend kept a diary and wrote everything down, but I've lost touch with her. What do you think it was? What we thought it was back then. We weren't dreaming. I'm quite sane. Honest. Barbara and Terry, Newbury. Having listened to BBC Radio Nottingham on Tuesday, I went searching for new clippings on 1987, which my husband and myself witnessed. It was 5:15 PM on Wednesday, December 9th, 1987. On my way home for work in Hucknall, my husband Terry met me on Kingsway Road off Watnall Road. As we were nearing each other, I looked up as I heard a drone, and it was this huge object. Lots of windows and lights going not too fast and not too high, as it seemed to fill a big area, but just passed over. We couldn't believe what we had saw, and I was pleased to see it in the Evening Post the next day. Nottingham Evening Post. Mystery of City UFO Sightings. Baffled police and airport officials have admitted they are stumped by reports of a close encounter with a mysterious flying object over Nottingham last night. Calls from Broxtowe, West Bridgford and Sherwood areas reported sightings of strange lights in the sky of an object the size of a football pitch, travelling very slowly and accompanied by a deep hum. But inquiries revealed there were no aircraft in the area at the time. I just don't know what it was, a police spokesman said. We checked with the Civil Aviation Authority, East Midlands Airport and RAF bases, but no one was able to help. But police have had no reports of anyone being beamed aboard the mystery craft so far.